This is Karen Moss from the Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute, and I'm here today with one of our alumni from Cohort 1, Taylor White. And we're doing a series on our alumni called Where Are They Now? And we're just catching up with different ones as we can. Taylor, I believe you graduated in 2014.
Yep.
The first cohort. So I'm just going to let you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing in your career path since graduating from Miami and the Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute.
Sure. Yeah. So as Karen said, Karen, my name's Taylor. I after graduating from Miami, I went to Madison, Wisconsin, where I was working as a software developer on a couple different teams within Epic, which is basically the nation's largest electronic medical record software company. So about 75% of patients today in the United States are treated by clinicians that are using Epic. Epic basically deals with all aspects of hospital or outpatient care. So that might be the billing, it'll be the scheduling, the movement of patients within the hospital, which beds are they going to, the pharmacy, everything like that. So within Epic, I've actually worked on 3 different teams during my time there. I worked there for about 6 years and just recently left to start my own company. But within Epic, I first started on what we call like the patient flow team. Patient flow basically deals with handoffs within the hospital. So this is an inpatient workflow. So if a patient gets admitted to the hospital, the very first thing that we need to do is decide where they're going to go. Which unit are they going to go to? Is that going to be a cardiovascular unit? Is that going to be intensive care unit? What level of care does that patient actually need? And beds are actually one of the most valuable resources within a hospital. So, and oftentimes hospitals will actually be running at like 95, 99, 100% capacity. And especially in the more valuable beds like the peri-op unit after surgery or intensive care units. So some of the projects I was working on there, I was doing hands-on software development. So I'd go out to hospitals, talk with them, understand what some of the use cases were, and we would basically try to generalize the software enhancements or features we're adding across essentially all of patient care that's delivered within the United States. So we wouldn't really do one-off solutions, but we try to go out, get feedback from a number of different doctors, nurses, unit clerks, and try to understand what it is that they're trying to do, and then bring that use case or that patient care model into the software to help facilitate that workflow. That was the first team I was working on, and some of the things I did there was allowing for reporting on overflow. So oftentimes when there might be like a local, like geolocal, like event where there's a big traffic accident or there's an illness going around and hospitals are operating at over 100% capacity, they'll bring out beds into the hallways. Mm-hmm. So being able to track where those patients are, because typically those beds aren't in the software, being able to also understand which units are over 100% was really valuable for nurses when they're trying to figure out where to staff nurses at the next shift. And then the next thing I was really working on as I became a manager on that team was doing some predictive modeling. So we were trying to understand either seasonality, so that might be in the winter and the fall, flu season's coming about, so we actually need to staff more nurses during weekends or certain days of the week based off of some of the trends we saw in the data from the past so many years, and also predicting which patients are actually going to be discharged. So that was my big focus the first couple of years at the company. Karen, I don't know if you want me to keep going.
And so where were you located geographically when you were working for Epic?
Yeah, so I was working in Madison, Wisconsin. Okay. Almost all the employees within Epic within the United States live in Madison, Wisconsin, and we've been growing internationally quite a bit. So I had the opportunity to go travel out to some of our customers over in Saudi Arabia and Lebanon and the Netherlands. So that was kind of neat to see, especially visit some employees that were out there too.
Yeah. And you were a computer science major? Was that your major? Yeah, that's what I thought. And I know you're doing something different now. You actually are the CEO of your own company now, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But One of the questions I wanted to ask you, because there's that college experience, there are the projects you're doing, there's all that stuff. But could you say like what your biggest obstacle was, or what was really challenging for you, the bigger obstacles you faced going from college actually into your career?
Yeah. So my immediate reaction to that was less structure, I guess. One of the things that was really cool that I really liked about my job and my career thus far has been getting sort of these open-ended problems that are given to you and trying to understand what the right solution is. And so, oftentimes I think I feel like the Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute actually prepared us really well for this. Just going, we're putting on this conference, figure it out. And we would have to actually break out into different teams and kind of understand like, what is it that we want folks to get out of that conference, kind of set the goals and set the parameters for that experience. And that is how I felt, a lot of times projects are given to you with parameters already defined. And I think especially in college, but also going back to earlier school years, the parameters are very well defined. And I think moving into the real world, they're not. It's oftentimes it'd be great to predict down to the exact number of patients that are going to be in a unit on a given date and time. But the reality is, like, we can't spend 1,000 years trying to come up with the perfect algorithm. We need to kind of balance these different needs of getting something out there that is improved, but is also accurate enough that can actually be actionable by the clinicians. So kind of understanding and setting the right boundaries for your team or your project. And that's really set, from a consensus and working with others that don't even work for the company, rather than given to you. I think was one of the early kind of eye-opening experiences that I observed.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying like you're going into a situation now where no, they're not just handing you this paper and saying do A, B, C, D. This is how you get there. You're actually having to figure it out, as you said.
Yeah, exactly. I think because roughly what will typically happen is that you might have a manager that's talking with customers fairly frequently, or in certain scenarios, I was that manager. But a customer might bring something up that we're really struggling with staffing nurses, and that's basically the problem statement. And so then my early days within the company was basically go talk to nurses and doctors, go fly, pick which customer you're going to go to. Which I actually flew back to Cincinnati quite a few times because I enjoyed talking with the folks at University of Cincinnati and Cincinnati Children's. But talk with them to understand what the exact issues are and come back and decide what we're going to do about it. So yeah, really trying to take this really abstract statement and bring it down to here's a project plan. It's going to take us 3 months to do this piece, 6 months to do this piece, and then we'll deliver it within 12 months.
And like you said, absolutely, the Leadership Institute gave you a taste of that. So I'm glad you had that in your tool belt.
Yeah.
What would you say, what kind of unexpected changes have you been exposed to since graduating? And what strategies did you employ to embrace those changes?
Yeah, so I'd say, the first I think is unhappy customers, right? So, or we have, there's been a couple of times where we've had certain failures, like there's been an earthquake and a hospital data system has gone down. And we've had to kind of figure out and just really be really flexible and be willing to kind of change our whole plan, right? If we have a project plan we're working on for 12 months, the next day, because we're working in healthcare, there might be some kind of flaw in a system, or there might be some kind of hardware issue that goes down, and we need to essentially scrap everything we're working on, go tell the folks that were involved in that project, the different customers that are kind of expecting that project to be delivered in a certain time frame, that due to this other need, we need to put that on the side, and then actually go out and talk with the other customers. So I think one experience I remember very distinctly early on was flying out to a very unhappy customer that was in Texas, who was struggling to monitor capacity within their hospital. And so, executives would want to know why they're getting these very high waiting time reviews from patients in the ER, even though there were open beds in certain units, and kind of blaming Epic, which is one of the central nervous systems of the hospital. So the very first thing, kind of like went through my mind is, I'm a software developer, so I spent a lot of time just programming, and just being flexible and being able to listen, I think went a long way to, helping the customer feel heard. And, something that was new and outside the box of what I was doing every day. And so, I think just generally like being flexible and trying to listen to the needs that are being presented to you that might not be what you're doing every day. And then thinking outside of the box, right? So there's certain our software has a lot of flexibility in terms of what can be configured, but also hearing different needs that have arisen that are very immediate. We can't go back and do like a 12-month project and deliver it to a customer to really solve that need. We need to think about how to use the tools in ways that we weren't actually anticipating them being used. And that has actually brought out a bunch of cool features that we've been able to essentially like market without actually having to do any development, because customers were figuring out ways to do it, before we had really thought about it. So I'd say that's one is just being flexible and just trying to think outside of the box. So you might have been building something with the anticipation of it being used one way, but instead, your customers have other needs that you might not have been thinking about when you're designing it, and then essentially allowing them to use their creativity and then develop against that.
Very fluid. You have to be fluid in your thinking and
exactly
responding to that. So before we go to where are you now and learn a little bit about OurGov is your new company. I do want to ask you, what did you learn in the Leadership Institute, or what seeds were planted when you were there that's helped you, made a difference in understanding what's going on around you now?
Yeah. So I think there's three big ones that I actually use basically every day, at least at different parts of my career at Epic. So the first was learning about the whole agile process, which is particularly helpful, I think, in software, but in general, it works across all industries. But it's something that I use at Epic every single day in various capacities. We had teams that I was on where we were using whiteboards with sticky notes, like we were at the Leadership Institute, and very much breaking it down by the project and the state of each task. And we'd break those down. We would literally do 4 to 6 hour tasks and say, like, what is it that we're going to be working on for the next week, and move them to the next section on the whiteboard every day. We would stand up with the team and do that, and in various forms. And I think that was really helpful, both from a communication perspective of understanding what others are working on in the team. And very often it would come up that somebody else was working on something that was a similar problem that I was working on, and that would very much help us be essentially a more efficient team, rather than me going through and either Googling or looking through some internal documents online. It essentially saved Epic time and money by allowing us to share some of the knowledge that we're actively working on. So that was the first one. I think the other two became more valuable to me as I rose within the company in terms of my managerial responsibilities. So about 3 years in, I would say, I became the manager of a large development team of about 45 developers. And at that point, I had very few direct reports that were actually writing development, but I had managers that were reporting to me that had developers working for them. And a lot of my job then became trying to understand what the team should be working on. And I think the thing I always come back to is the book Leadership versus Management, or the difference between leadership and management. I think that was a John Kotter book that was really valuable to me to kind of think about, typically if when I was a manager working with developers they're working on a project with me, I would be doing the very day-to-day, like the Scrum tasks. What is it that we're trying to accomplish this week? What bugs need to be fixed? And as I transitioned to that manager of managers effectively, it was very much geared towards how can I structure the team in a way that promotes sharing of knowledge? What are our long-term goals? What are our 10-year goals that we want to work towards? And are the projects that we're working on now contributing towards solving those bigger problems? So I think that was one that had always stuck with me, even when I was in the Leadership Institute before I was really doing that work. I really liked that book. And then I think the last one was the crucial conversations or critical conversations. And I know, Karen, you had brought this up to me. I probably cut this part out of the interview, but about having working with one or two individuals and your other responsibilities that were difficult to work with, and that's something that I experienced when I switched teams to become this product lead. And we would sit down, and basically it became apparent to me that the team was not working on the right things at all. And so I basically wanted to revamp a lot of the software suite. And those were very difficult conversations to have with people that have been working on the scheduling team for 20 plus years. I'd say we're going to get rid of all of this whole suite of software that folks folks are familiar with within the company, and replace it with a more efficient workflow. And we would have design conversations where we would talk about what is it the developer is going to be doing, which settings are we going to be getting rid of. And I just remember very, very distinctly going into these design meetings and trying to focus on being goal focused, listening to other people's opinions without shutting them down outright, and essentially trying to bring data. So I actually went back and looked at the acronym that we learned about in the crucial conversations, which was share the facts, tell your story, ask for other approaches, talk tentatively, and encourage testing. And I think that's something that we did all the time in these weekly meetings, where I would come in with data. One very specific example was we were getting rid of this ability to schedule with recurring, we called them patterns. So use case might be you just got out of surgery and you need to be seen by a physical therapist 3 times a week for the first 6 weeks, and then once a week for the next 3 weeks, right? And that we had an ability to do that in the software with one scheduling flow, as opposed to scheduling a recurrence of three times for 6 weeks and then booking a second set of appointments for another 3 weeks once a week. And I brought in all the data to say, look, only 0.14% of appointments are booked this way. If we get rid of this approach, is there another way schedulers could get it done? And finally, I was able to convince the other folks in the room that had been on the team for a very long period of time that this actually made sense. But we would have a lot of these emotionally charged conversations, and really trying to bring it back to the goals and using data to make those decisions was something that has been really valuable to me, and it's, I think, frankly, saved my team a lot of time and money, rather than trying to postulate on what the right decision is.
Right. Okay. So 2 of your things were books that, a lot of times like, oh, we have to read another book, but they do teach you some very cool things, and obviously because you're using it, you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's
actually
great.
When I started at Epic, they give every single employee the 7 habits of highly effective people, which I thought was really interesting, which I'd already had, but they give that to every employee.
Well, before we wrap up our time here, I know you are actually, I don't know if it's a vacation, but you're traveling. I know that. So I think you said you're in Santa Fe right now or something.
El Paso.
Yeah. Tell us, just while we wrap up here, just tell us about your new venture, what you're doing now with your own business and what that's all about.
Yeah, so I just left Epic, the company I was working at for the past 6 years, to start my own software company that is geared towards helping businesses, nonprofit groups, and industry groups. So that might be like the American Bankers Association, or like the National Association of Iron Workers, or something like that. Better monitor and track legislation that's being proposed, or engage with regulators that might be changing some of the rules that essentially our society is governed by. And today, there are a lot of companies that have, especially large companies, that have teams of lawyers that will monitor bills around the country, and either fly out to some of those public hearings or engage with some of the legislators very early on. But that's a very expensive process. So what my company is geared towards doing is actually using some natural language processing to try and put additional metadata on bills that are proposed and rules that are being written by whether it's the EPA or some of the bills that are going through either the House or Senate, and automatically alert these groups that there are bills that potentially relate to their industry that are being proposed. Now, what we're doing is then we can actually use that additional metadata that we put on the bills to associate with certain individuals or agencies that are actually involved in writing the rules. So that might actually alert bills that are already being proposed that a company might want to advocate against or for the bill being passed. But also then we can use that data to help build a better directory of elected officials so that companies can more quickly find and more efficiently find the right agency or legislator to work with in order to propose an additional rule that might help make the marketplace a little bit more fair.
And when did you, this is pretty new. When did you start this? Was it in August or?
Yeah, I started this just a few weeks ago in August. Yeah, I incorporated in the state of Wisconsin and bought a domain name and everything. So things are progressing.
Do you have anyone else that works with you right now?
So I have a few developers that are spending some of like their time on the side, like on nights and weekends. But for the most part, it's almost entirely me. I have worked at, I actually talked with a few former Lockheed graduates and or employees that work at my old company about some of the opportunities to work with me. But so far, no other full-time employees. And but yeah, hopefully it seems promising. I've been talking with some potential customers and hoping to get something up and running by the end of the year.
Well, it sounds exciting. Sounds like you are just moving right along in your career and maybe doing some things differently than you thought you might be doing. I just want to thank you so much for your time. We're going to be sharing this. I think uploading it to our YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing it through different. Once we get it all, I don't know if we can edit it or what we do, but we'll get that out there, and I'll make sure you get a link to it and so forth. But
awesome.
Taylor, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you. And we really appreciate your time, and we're just glad to see that you are definitely flourishing in your life.